Before we jump into making a settings screen, I want to talk a little bit about data persistence in Android. Persisting data is the act of saving some data to the phone. There are 5 different ways to persist data that you should be aware of. First is persisting data using saved instant state, which is what we've talked about earlier. This allows you to save key value pairs to store the state of one of your views. It is usually used to save the state during things like app rotation or if the system destroys the activity because of memory constraints. This is a temporary place to store the state of an application, and it should only be used if the user is still actively using the app. If the user pressed the back button to quit the app or restarts the entire phone, the data saved here is gone. If you need data to be available across app restarts and turning the phone off and on again, you need to save the data to an actual file system. Android has 3 ways to do this. The first is the Shared Preferences class. What Shared Preferences does is you specify a file, and it saves simple key value pairs to that file. The keys for those key value pairs are always strings, and the values are primitives like strings, string sets, booleans, and various numerical types. After those key value pairs are saved to a file, all sorts of things can happen to the state of the phone. But as long as it still works and your app hasn't been uninstalled, you can still get the information from that file. Share Preferences is usually used for things like if you need to save a single text or numerical value about the user. For example, if the app is a game, it might save the player's name in a shared preference. Or if you're building a browser application, you might save the last web page that the user was looking at and reopen it when the app relaunches. Sometimes, though, you'll have more complicated data than just simple key value pairs. For example, perhaps you have an application that allows users to create and save book recommendations from friends. There are a few things about this data that makes it different from just using key value pairs. First, you're going to be storing multiple book recommendations. Second, the number of book recommendations will change as the users add new ones. And finally, the book recommendations each have a lot of associated data, such as who recommended the book, the name of the book, the genre, etc. All these differences make a handful of key value pairs totally inadequate for handling the size and organization of such data. In this case, you should consider using a database. Android provides full support for relational databases in the form of SQLite databases. And it provides various framework components, such as content providers, that help manage and share data in databases. We will be talking a lot more about databases in the future lessons, so stay tuned for that. Up to this point, we've been talking about text data, but at some point, you might want to create an app where users generate, download, or otherwise need to store multimedia or large amounts of text. For example, a podcast app might need to store audio files for the podcasts to play offline. A camera app will need to store users' pictures, and an app for your local library might need to store downloaded ebooks. In these cases, Android offers the ability to save files using internal storage, which is just saving it to the phone's hard drive, and also external storage, which is saving it to something like a memory card. And finally, you might find yourself in a situation where you actually need to save data in a place accessed by multiple devices. This might be something as simple as a leaderboard of scores for your new game app, or if you're building a social networking app that allows users to log in from any phone. In these cases, you'll end up not storing data on your phone, but in the cloud. This usually means setting up a database on a server or using a service like Google's Firebase. In this course, however, we'll be focusing on covering these methods of data persistence in depth. In fact, we've already covered save instant state. But if you're interested in learning more about saving files or setting up a server or even using Firebase, I've linked some documentations that will get you started. But first, some quick quizzes.